Well, have you been to the State Fair yet? I'm Charlie Sykes, and Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was a huge shakeup in the local media as Journal Communications, the company that owns this radio station, this television station, merges with EW Scripps Company. The Brewers trade for a two-time Gold Glove winner. A liberal group launches a huge ad blitz aimed at defeating Milwaukee Sheriff David Clark Jr. Is Chris Abele behind that? Alderman Bob Donovan announces that he's running for mayor against Tom Barrett. And the Wisconsin State Fair begins its run. But we start with the state Supreme Court. Last week, the state's highest court upheld Act 10, the collective bargaining reforms, in its entirety, rejecting what may be the final major legal challenge to Governor Scott Walker's collective bargaining reforms. The justice also upheld the state's voter ID law, rejecting arguments that the requirements placed an undue burden on voting. That won't be the last word, however, since a federal judge has put the law on hold pending appeal. Now, joining me on our panel this morning, the Milwaukee Community Journal's Mikal Holt, the managing editor of RightWisconsin.com, Colin Roth, political strategist Lynn DeBruin, and Milwaukee County Supervisor Deanna Alexander. Colin, let's start with you on the voter ID bill. What are the chances, 0 to 100, that in fact we will have voter ID in time for the November elections?
I really think it's 0. I mean, while it was upheld at the Supreme Court, this is still blocked at the federal level in a challenge, and it's on appeal to the federal court in the 7th Circuit. I think this case does make it more likely that it could be upheld on appeal, but we don't.
Well, why would it make it more likely?
The Supreme Court was able to strike down some of the very premise of these arguments that were used by Judge Adelman to strike it down.
Okay, Lynn DeBruin, you know, your thoughts on this. Shirley Abramson, the Chief Justice, actually used some rather incendiary language. She said that the court majority was following the lead of Jim Crow in approving voter ID.
Yeah, and I think, well, from my personal political view, she went a little too far. Yeah. But I think that the bottom line is we won't have it by September. I do think that the federal folks have a little bit different of a basis in the constitutional law of this, that they could rule otherwise. But I do think the recent rulings does harm it.
Deanna Alexander.
I think that minorities should be offended that they've been dragged into this voter ID dispute for or against it, and some people, like the Chief Justice, are treating them as if they're too ignorant to go get an ID.
Mikal Holt.
I wouldn't necessarily go that far. We did talk earlier about the voting actually went up in the state where they introduced it. You know, it's an unnecessary law. Let's be honest about that. I wouldn't go as far as the justice said, but you know, one thing that did come out of this was now they'll make it easier for people to get ID, and I think that's essential to it eventually passing.
Well, that's why I think that Colin's right when he says this might actually help the appeal to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. What the Supreme Court did was to essentially tweak the law. There was a little bit of a back and forth earlier in the legislature about whether or not they needed to fix a flaw in the law. And the Republicans in the legislature decided not to do it.
The justices are writing law.
But the justices, in effect, did it. Okay, Deanna Alexander, Act 10. Is all of the drama over? When you think about what we've gone through in the last 3 years, the boycotts, the recalls, the legal challenges, is it over? Is Act 10 here to stay?
I think Act 10 is here to stay. The leftists are going to let it fizzle and sizzle for a while and moan and groan, but I'm really glad that the Milwaukee County Board can now finally stop hedging and start moving forward with some good policy.
Okay, Lynn DeBruin.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is everyone now realizes that if anyone wants to try and undo Act 10, which I agree would be very difficult to do, but if anyone wants to do that, the only recourse they now have is the legislature. The courts are a done deal. It's not going to. It's constitutional. It's going to be upheld. It's upheld.
Okay, the other question, Colin Roth, is what happens to some of those school districts, some of those municipalities that after Judge Colas, the Dane County judge, ruled, that rammed through some of these contracts? What is the legal status of those contracts now?
Well, those contracts would seem to be valid right now, but there are groups that are saying they could face lawsuits over those contracts. We saw that happen down in Kenosha, saying that those are invalid. I would suspect that we would see some lawsuits over that.
Okay, Mikal Holt.
Yeah, and then another decision that the Supreme Court came up with was about same-sex marriage, and what they essentially did was say that these civil unions are legal. So, I don't know how this is going to play out further in the courts.
Well, that one seems to be kind of moot because we know that the gay marriage issue is going to be played out at the U.S. Supreme Court level. You know, these were major decisions by the court, but it's kind of interesting that, you know, when the dust cleared at the end of last week, nothing had really changed. Act 10 was still the law of the land here in Wisconsin. Voter ID is still pending in federal court, and that's where it's going to be decided. And gay marriage is also going to be decided in the courts as well. Does it have any effect? You know, a lot of the national headlines were that Scott Walker was buoyed by these legal victories. Is it a plus, minus, even? Does it have any effect on the governor's election?
I really don't think so. As you said, I think a lot of things kind of just stayed as the status quo. But it is a good reminder that Act 10 is here and that it's, you know, saved local governments over $3 billion. That is something that's going to be a big part of his campaign. Okay, what has your glass half full and what has your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt, you're first.
Well, my glass is half full because effective Friday, the Do Not Call program was strengthened to stop annoying telemarketers. But it's half empty because it wasn't expanded to include those irritating political robocalls.
Colin Roth.
My glass is half full because the Wisconsin Supreme Court upheld Wisconsin's voter ID law. It's half empty because the law is still blocked in federal court, at least for now.
Lynn, DeBruin.
Well, my glass is half empty because West Africa's Ebola outbreak is the worst Ebola outbreak in history. But my glass is half full because the CDC is helping African health systems manage, and they say the risk of an American outbreak is very low.
Yeah, define very low. Deanna Alexander.
On the flip side, my glass is half full because Kent Brantley, an American doctor in Liberia that has contracted the Ebola virus, voluntarily turned down the only dose of a potentially life-saving serum so that his infected nurse could have a chance at survival. But my glass is half empty because the United States government is bringing the 2 infected Americans stateside. The virus can't be both a deadly outbreak and safe to bring to our population.
Well, my glass is half empty because 2 mothers were arrested and charged with felonies for letting their children walk to the park to play. It's half full because most of my callers to my radio show realized that was a ridiculous overreaction by the nanny state. Next on Sunday Insight, the end of an era for journal communications. The end of an era. 2 storied media companies announced a merger. Journal Communications merges with Cincinnati-based EW Scripps. Both companies then spin off their newspapers, including the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, into a new separate company, which will be headquartered in Milwaukee. Journal's radio and TV stations will be merged with the ones owned by Scripps, making the company the nation's 5th largest independent station group, with 34 stations in 24 markets, including this television station. It will cover 18% of the country's TV households, and that company will be headquartered in Cincinnati, ending a very long tradition of local ownership here. Your take on this, Lynn DeBruin?
Well, I think especially in the short term, it's a boost for both entities. I think the only concern I have about it, and there's a lot of positives, but the only concern I have about it is while they're strengthening the Journal-Sentinel newspaper arm, they're going to now be in 14 markets, they're going to have no debt, have $10 million in cash, they're going to be a standalone newspaper entity. And across the country, when the newspaper units are on their own, they're much more vulnerable. So to me, it's like giving a whole bunch of new armor and then putting the company in a more risky arena. So long term, I don't know if this is good or bad for the Journal.
Okay, Deanna Alexander.
I think that to the more experienced older generations, this is a sad fact of the times. It's the cost of business. To those born in the 80s and 90s, this is something we're accustomed to. We adapt with technology. So there is a bittersweet local nostalgia that's being lost in this change, but we'll all adapt.
Okay,
Well, from a broadcast perspective, it strengthens your position. I mean, you can have some great influence on presidential elections, etc. You know, control of 1/5 of the 5th largest. I mean, that's phenomenal. You know, it's a little bit sad because, you know, the last couple of years, the Journal Sentinel has been laying off folks and stuff, and now you get this merger. So I wonder if you'd be hiring back any of those folks. As a matter of fact, how secure are you with this television program?
Well, that's an interesting question. What an interesting question. Colin Roth.
Yeah, Charlie and I, we're employees of this news company. There is something media consolidation is just a fact of life. It's a reality, and I'm not sure how great it is on a whole. But I do agree with Lynn that there is something kind of precarious about what they're doing with the Journal-Sentinel there.
Yeah, really good question though, Michael. And I for one welcome our new media overlords from Cincinnati. Go Bengals! And Skyline Chili is really one of my favorites. No, I have to say understand how long my history goes back with the company. My dad moved here when I was a kid in 1962 to go to work for the Milwaukee Sentinel after it had been purchased by the Journal Company, and I used to work for the old newspaper. And you work here in Radio City, and we have the radio station and the television station at WTMJ, and you walk down the halls and you see the pictures of all of the decades, all of the things that have happened here. And one of the distinctive parts of this television station and 620 WTMJ has always been that we were locally owned, we were locally controlled. And that was increasingly extremely unusual, given the reality of media consolidation. But I guess I'm one of those who's going to be a little bit nostalgic, and I understand the business logic completely that you need to go big or go home when it comes to the media consolidation. But I am going to be one of those who's going to be a little bit nostalgic for the loss of that local control. I mean, you go back to 1929, the Green Bay Packers were on our radio station, and every minute that station has broadcast has been a Milwaukee-based, Milwaukee-controlled, and now it will be owned out of Cincinnati. But I'm okay with that. You may not want to hear it, but we're going to tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice.
Well, mine is Alderman Bob Donovan. I think voters would take your campaign for mayor more seriously if you weren't simultaneously running for alderman.
Colin Roth.
My unsolicited advice is for Chief Justice Shirley Abramson, who called Wisconsin's voter ID law a return to Jim Crow. Shirley, get some perspective.
Lynn, DeBruin.
Well, my advice is to the CIA, which is not normally an agency I give advice to, but here goes. Don't let your boss tell the Senate Intelligence Committee that you were not spying on committee members when in fact you were.
Yeah, Deanna Alexander.
This goes out to the City of Milwaukee and school board leaders involved with the hacked extortion against St. Marcus, a choice school that outperforms many MPS schools. When you create a sham company to contract with and claim that it's all about the kids, hold your leader accountable when he blows your cover.
Well, my unsolicited advice, and it's very unsolicited this week, to Milwaukee County Executive Chris Abele. Reportedly, you're the guy willing to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars for these attack ads to defeat Sheriff David Clark, and that's your right. You can spend your daddy's money any way you want. But my advice, man up and admit that you are the one paying for the attacks instead of hiding behind this so-called Greater Wisconsin Committee. Mr. Abele. Next on Sunday Insight, Alderman Bob Donovan does announce that he's running for mayor, but does he stand a chance?
I'm announcing that I'm going to be a candidate for mayor of the city of Milwaukee. And my reasons are I feel strongly that Milwaukee can do better than what we're doing. We need to take the city in a different direction, and we need to be more aggressive at addressing, in my opinion, the real challenges that are holding this community back.
For mayor of Milwaukee is not until the spring of 2016, but the campaign's already begun. Alderman Bob Donovan announces he will challenge Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett. The South Side Alderman, though, may not be alone. North Side Alderman Joe Davis has also made noises about a mayoral run. All of this raises the question, and I'll pose it to you, Michael Holt. Do either of them have a chance, and why is this happening so early?
Well, it's happening early because Tom Barrett's an entrenched mayor, and you need to get the campaign kicked off in high gear and have at least a year to state your case. But I don't think this would be just these three candidates. You know, there's an effort underway to try to get Lena Taylor to run, and then there's Sheriff David Clark, who might throw his hat in the ring. And many people are suggesting that maybe Chris Abele is giving all of this money to the Greater Wisconsin Committee to defeat Sheriff Clark because he's afraid that he would then turn around and run for mayor. So this is going to have a real snowball effect. Does he have a chance? They all really have a chance.
Okay, is this a sign that Tom Barrett is vulnerable in 2016?
Absolutely. It's obviously too early to speculate who's going to win, but I'm pretty sure we're going to have a new mayor in the next election.
Why? Why would you say that? I mean, Tom Barrett got like 70% of the vote last time.
You know, I think that there's been a lot of failures in the media, most notably related to MPS and the real estate issues with St. Marcus, but further, I think the timing now with everybody coming out has a lot to do with Sheriff Clark, and everyone is expecting a crowded field.
Okay.
I think any politician who assumes they're not vulnerable is absolutely vulnerable. So we can start with that premise. But until we know who's in the race, you really can't answer if Tom Barrett's vulnerable or not. I think, you know, if it's just between Barrett and Donovan at this point, Donovan's got $15,000. The mayor's got $450,000. I do think that, you know, I think in the long run, the most viable candidate against Tom Barrett would be a viable African American or candidate of color with a credible history and a fundraising capability. And if he gets that type of a candidate, then I think you really do have a vulnerability.
Colin Roth.
Yeah, I think it's, if nothing else, it's going to be healthy for this city. If we have a referendum on things like jobs in the economy, public safety, school choice, education, there's a lot of issues that a challenger could run on. And it'd be great for this city to have that conversation.
I do think it's interesting that you are starting to see the opposition coming from both the north side and the south side, that he's being hit from different parts of the city, different parts of the political spectrum. And I do think that's an indication that people are not satisfied with the direction that the city is going. But I want to go back to your point. Obviously, the elephant in the room is Sheriff David Clark, who may or may not be even around after August 12th, because there is a full-out attempt to really destroy him in this campaign.
I mean, David Clark is not running for governor. He's not running for president.
I mean, the amount of money that we're hearing reports of $400,000 aimed at targeting him. Can he survive that kind of a blitz?
I think he can, because I think they're overestimating, you know, their strength, particularly in the black community. The black community, I mean, we have black, Tyrone Dumas. I mean, we have a lot of black leaders who are now coming out saying they support David Clark. I support David Clark. You know, David Clark has started talking about some issues that the black community can relate to. He's talking about poverty. He's talking about self-defense. You know, he's talking about intact families. These are things that we can relate to.
Okay, somebody is paying $400,000. This is a huge amount of money for a week and a half. I mean, that is carpet bombing.
Yeah.
So why would anyone think it is worth that much money to take out a sheriff?
Well, there's a lot of animosity towards Sheriff Clark, especially in this town, from whether it's Chris Abley or Tom Barrett or some people in the Democratic establishment here. It'll be really interesting to see if it has an effect, and if it fails, it could strengthen Sheriff Clark.
What is it that you don't get this week? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt, you're first.
Well, I don't get this. How Republicans who voted to sue the president over Obamacare can look in the mirror and tell themselves they truly believe in the democratic process.
Colin Roth.
What I don't get is how a successful school like St. Marcus can get the runaround from MPS and Milwaukee politicians over and over again, and this community just lets it happen.
Lynn DeBruin.
Well, what I don't get is John Boehner's leadership style, or lack of leadership. Boehner can't get his own legislation passed in a Republican-controlled House because he's allowed more rank-and-file Republicans to defy him than any speaker in modern times.
Deanna Alexander.
What I don't get is why leftists cry that the sky is falling over the notion of voter ID. But when they have to show an ID to open a bank account, apply for food stamps, unemployment, or Social Security, rent or buy a house, drive, rent, buy a car, get on an airplane, get married, adopt a pet, rent a hotel room, buy a cell phone, buy cigarettes, pick up a prescription, hold a protest, or donate blood, they are completely silent.
That's pretty good. Well, last Friday, Colin Roth, the other guy sitting right here, wrote a piece about a hole in Mary Burke's resume. It seems the campaign finance documents listing her thousands of dollars in contributions to the Obama campaign from 2007 through 2012 list her as having no employer. So what I don't get is, what was she doing all that time? Next on Sunday Insight, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. First, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Michael Holt, you're first.
Well, just losers this week. One of my sons was robbed at gunpoint last week, several hundred yards from this television station. My first thoughts were concerns about his safety. My second was hunting down the thugs and putting a cap in their behinds. Incidentally, he didn't call the police, saying he didn't believe anything would come of it. The sad reality is that many people feel the same way, and that's why we started listening to David Clark.
Colin Roth.
My winner is the Republican Party of Wisconsin for initiating a serious and hopefully long-term African-American outreach program. From jobs in the economy to school choice and public safety, conservatives ought to engage this confidently with the long-neglected community. My loser is big labor, which, with Act 10 upheld by Wisconsin Supreme Court, the legal fight over these reforms should be over.
Lynn DeBruin.
Well, my losers are the residents of Israel and the Gaza Strip and all the rest of us who want peace in the Middle East. After agreeing to a 72-hour ceasefire last Thursday, Hamas and Israel broke the ceasefire just 2 hours after it began and turned Friday into one of the most deadly days in the Gaza Strip so far. Despite the failed agreement, however, my winners are UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and our Secretary of State John Kerry, plus all the previous world leaders who genuinely attempted to negotiate a lasting peace for Israel.
Deanna Alexander.
As someone who's done border control work myself, my winners this week are border control agents, continuing to do their jobs despite a lack of concrete policy and leadership support while they manage the problem of unhealthy and undocumented children pouring into the United States.
Well, my winner, Act 10. After all the rallies, protests, recalls, and legal challenges, Act 10 was upheld last week in its entirety. Loser. After all the rallies, protests, recalls, and legal challenges, the Unionistas failed to stop a bill that has already saved taxpayers more than $3 billion. Thanks for joining us, and join me for my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week.